Good morning, everyone. This is Robert Hubbell from today's edition newsletter. This is our weekly Saturday live stream, except it's taking place on Friday because I will be traveling tomorrow to Tennessee to help move my daughter and her family to Columbia, Tennessee. Um, a very strong turnout today. I want to just sort of note how far we have come because I think it's a very hopeful sign. These live streams started a year ago at a time of widespread panic among the American people and the readers of this newsletter. You may not remember, but I remember quite well the first day that we held one of these. And I think Jess Piper joined me for that first live stream. It was a relatively new technology on Substack, but people were in an absolute panic. It was the first week or first 10 days after Trump had taken office, and he was doing incredible things. Doge had invaded and taken over the Office of Personnel Management. It was attempting to take over the payments system from the US Treasury. It had shuttered hundreds of federal websites. It decimated the senior leadership in the FBI. It fired FBI agents across the nation. It fired the top 30 staffers at the DOJ. It began unilaterally and unconstitutionally withholding funds from agencies in violation of the Impoundment Control Act. Um, it seemed like it was a coup. And in fact, on February 1st, I sent this email, call it by its name, a coup, which is the most read newsletter ever published. It was read approximately 400,000 times. And, most up until recently, about every month, I'd get about 1,000 new readers. In that one-day period on February 1st, I got 12,000 new readers to the newsletter, and over the course of the next week, the figure ballooned to about 20,000 new people reading the newsletter because there was just this overwhelming sense of panic. Well, we've certainly come a long way. We have prevailed, we have endured, we have even though we were knocked back on our feet at first, we now have the momentum. They are on their heels. They are scrambling. We have seized the narrative. We have beaten back much of what happened with Doge, although the damage was done because of the suspension of funds. And we have flipped the top three issues that Trump rode to victory. Immigration, which is now a liability for them, the economy with his crazy tariffs, and it looks like the Supreme Court is going to come out with an opinion the final week of February on tariffs, and then on government accountability and the Epstein files. They've lost they've just lost the people. So the most amazing thing that happened, though, is that American citizens took to the streets. They raised their voices. They stood out. They said, "We are here. This is our government. We're in control. You exist because we grant you the legitimacy. We grant you the power to exist, and we're here to take it back." And I have to say, after a year of really difficult, challenging, traumas for the nation, I feel confident. I'm looking forward to the 2026 midterms with a renewed sense of having turned the corner. And every time I say that, I get criticism from people who say, don't say that because people will give up. I have more faith in you than they do. I know you won't give up because I know you're still standing on street corners in Minneapolis, even though the border czar, Tom Homan, said that they're pulling the troops, the ICE and Border Patrol, out of Minneapolis. You're not giving up. You're not going away. In fact, I know that the next No King's Day, March 28th, is going to be the biggest ever, as it should be, and it shouldn't be 5 million, it shouldn't be 10 million, it should be 20 million or 25 million people. And at that point, we will have really bent the arc in a meaningful way. So it took a year to get here, but we are here because you refuse to give up, because even though we all fought battles in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, and we're having to fight them all over again, you are. And that's what it takes. What it takes for this to stop is for enough of us to say no. And we are getting very close to that point. So those are the end of my remarks. And if you want to tell a friend what Hubbell said today, he said, "Thank you for saving democracy again. You did it. Good for you." People are still worried by the questions that I have. I have over 3 dozen questions, and I've tried to group them into logical groups so that I can address them efficiently. But what they show is while people recognize that we have come a long way, they are still worried about what comes next. And that's absolutely the right attitude to take. We should be worried. They're not giving up. They're not going away. They have this preternatural ability to just continue to do awful things in the face of public condemnation and criticism. So, let me talk about a basket of issues that people are worried about, and they relate broadly to the SAVE Act and to the 2026 midterms. I would say that is the thing that people are most worried about. The first question really is, given that the revised SAVE Act has passed once again in the House, do I believe it will be stopped in the Senate? Yes. That's not a guarantee, but in order for the SAVE Act to pass in the Senate, it would need support from 8 Democrats or the abolition of the filibuster. And something that went sort of under the radar this week is Republicans got together. They were going to have a big meeting, Senate Republicans, and they were going to talk about how they were going to get the SAVE Act over the line in the Senate. And the only way that they can do that is to say, okay, we're going to bite the bullet and we're going to end the filibuster for most voting legislation. They had their meeting. And there was no reporting out of that meeting that there was the appetite to end the filibuster to get the SAVE Act over the line. So that's the first point. While I can't guarantee, no one can guarantee that they won't adopt the nuclear option, it is effectively the end of their party if they do that in the next 2 or 3 years. Because if they do that, when we take back the presidency and Congress, we will pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We will pass the For the People Act. We will reform voting in America to make it fair, just, equitable, and available for everyone. And once we have a level playing field, the Republican Party is the fourth smallest voting bloc in America after the Democratic Party, independents, and did not vote. They are a minority party who have remained in power because of the filibuster. So I do not believe that they will abolish the filibuster in order to pass the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is horrible because it makes it harder for people to vote. And I will address the SAVE Act in a little bit more detail this coming week. Um, but the one thing I want to give people confidence about is that the obstacles that are being created, Democrats are better prepared to address because we have been fighting voter suppression all along. There are groups like Vote Writers who are out there whose entire mission is to help people get voter IDs. There's Democracy Docket that will file lawsuits across the nation. And the fact of the matter is that Democratic states will make it easy for people to come up with the proof of citizenship requirements. It will be red states that will make it more difficult. And so, effectively, what Republicans are going to do is they will make it harder in the states they control for people to vote. Voter suppression is a blunt instrument, it affects everyone. And it will make it harder for women to prove citizenship depending on what documents the states say will be available. But those obstacles will apply to Republican women as easily as they will apply to Democratic women. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be worried about it. I am just saying that we, the Democrats, have been dealing with this for decades, and we're in a better position to fight back. But I do not believe that the SAVE Act will pass in the Senate. Now, having said that, um, I there are several questions that are some flavor of, but even if Trump doesn't cancel the 2026 midterms, which he cannot do and will not do, it doesn't matter if he invokes the Insurrection Act. It doesn't matter whether he declares martial law, which he cannot do. It's not a thing. The US didn't declare martial law during the Civil War. It didn't declare martial law during the Second World War, except for a brief time in Hawaii after the Pearl Harbor Act, and virtually every act that the government took under martial law in Hawaii during that time was invalidated. So he's not going to impose martial law. He won't use the Insurrection Act. But as one reader put it in a question, well, he'll do everything to call into question the legitimacy and accuracy of the votes. That's fair, because that's exactly what he did in advance of the November 2025 elections. There was a whole slew of elections at the end of last year, on November 9th, I believe. And before those elections, he was out there questioning the validity and saying all of the things that he says to sort of posture himself to be able to attack the elections. And then I don't know if all of you remember what happened on November 10th, the day after the election. Nothing. He shut up. And the reason he stopped talking about it is that the victory margins were so large, there was nothing he could do. And so, for those of you who are worried, as we should be, about his attacks on the 2026 elections, there is a complete answer. Get people to the polls to vote in overwhelming numbers. We are not potted plants. We have agency. We have power. We can see a threat. We should focus our energy on taking away Trump's power to attack those elections. And the simplest way to do it is to show up and vote in overwhelming numbers. And then there was a question about, well, won't he just seize the ballots? Absolutely not. He's not going to do that. No magistrate judge will allow interference with civil elections in that manner. What happened in Fulton County, Georgia, with a federal magistrate judge issuing a um, a search warrant to seize the ballots was an abomination. I still do not understand how that federal magistrate judge granted that search warrant or the warrant to seize the ballots, because the evidence that was given to that federal magistrate judge was lunatic. I mean, it was conspiracy theories that had been rejected again and again and again and again. And sadly, that federal magistrate judge was fooled or deceived, and that's I'm gonna go with that view. There are other views that are darker, but she was fooled or conceived or deceived because what Trump did is he took these election denialists who were defeated by Mark Elias and Democracy Docket and the Elias law firm 60 times in 2024, I'm sorry, 2020, and he appointed them to official positions in his administration and gave them titles that made it sound like they were no longer the crazies that they are. Well, shame on that magistrate judge for not doing a little bit more to understand that the affiants, the people providing the affidavits to her, were not credible. Um, Lesson learned. As I wrote at the time when those ballots were seized, it's good that it happened a year out, because what it has done, it has allowed us and organizations like Democracy Docket and the ACLU, and other pro democracy organizations to stop it. And we have to get the word out to say that what the FBI did in Fulton County is to destroy the integrity of all of those ballots. They are worthless. The chain of custody has been broken. The voting computers, the tapes that were seized are garbage. No public official can rely on them, and it doesn't matter what the FBI says about them. So, do I think that uh, ballots will be seized in the 2026 midterms? No, it's not going to happen. There is no federal magistrate who will repeat the mistake that the federal magistrate in North Fulton County, Georgia, did in issuing that. Um, so that's the first basket of issues. I feel while we cannot let our guard down, we aren't going to let our guard down. I feel confident that while we have to fight, we will have free and fair elections in November 2026, and we will not be burdened by the SAVE Act. Um, the second group of issues came from readers in Minneapolis or who were supporting Minneapolis. And what they said is inspiring. They said, we're still out here. We're still standing. We're still doing grocery deliveries. We're still helping our neighbors. And we don't believe it. We hear what um, Holman has said about retreating, but we still see people on our streets and we're not giving up. We're not going away. And the other flavor of that question is, where are people going next? Because in addition to the ICE and Border Patrol agents being pulled out of Minneapolis, the National Guard have now been pulled out of every city in which they were formerly stationed. So there has been this temporary withdrawal. Well, we know that there are some red states that are entering and cities that are entering into written agreements um, with ICE and Border Patrol to voluntarily allow them to come into their cities, and they're agreeing to the cooperation of the local law enforcement with ICE in these mass deportation efforts, which is nuts. Local law enforcement everywhere across America already have their hands completely full. And to talk about taking all of those public safety officers and devoting them full time to a mass deportation effort of immigrants who are, for the most part, peaceful, productive members of our society who are our friends and neighbors and fellow parishioners and employees is just a monstrous waste of resources. But there are Nashville is one of the cities, for example, that's entering into one of these agreements. I got news for Tom Homan. There are Democrats in Nashville who are going to show up and they're going to protest in Nashville just like they did in Minneapolis. So somehow the notion that they're going to go in and that it's going to be easy because local police have capitulated is not going to work out for them. But for the most part, I think what the people of Minneapolis have done, the protesters across America have forced the Trump administration to rethink their strategy and to withdraw into what they regard as friendly territory. That doesn't mean that we can let up. In fact, it just simply means that the awfulness will be transferred somewhere else and inflicted on a new group of immigrants somewhere else. Now, there were a couple of comments where people just simply expressed their sorrow and their outrage for what's happening to the immigrant community and for their children. I mean, they are being taken from wherever they live and they're being whisked away as quickly as possible, mainly to Texas, because the availability of habeas corpus proceedings in Texas is essentially non existent. And what it means is, in light of this recent Fifth Circuit decision, which says that in the Fifth Circuit, for the moment, in the Fifth Circuit, there really is no right to a bond to be released pending hearing of your deportation proceeding. It's permanent incarceration. And so the incentive is for ICE and Border Patrol to grab people, get them to Texas where they're just warehoused indefinitely until effectively they give up because they can no longer stand the conditions of incarceration and they agree to voluntary departure. It's horrible. Readers are urging me to use terms like concentration camps. And there's another term which is escaping me at the moment. And I think that is a fair description of what is happening. As in an exchange with one reader, what I said was the term concentration camp has a specific historical context in World War II, both in Germany and in the United States. And so whether that term that is laden with a horrible historic genocide and mistreatment of Japanese Americans in the United States is the appropriate term for what's going on in Texas. I don't know. That's a difficult question. I do know that what is happening is inhumane, that taking 2-year-old and 5-year-old children, an 11-year-old and 16-year-old kids, and sending them into prison camps indefinitely where they're denied clean water and basic medical care, and they're not being educated and they're not being vaccinated, where there are measles outbreaks. It's just inhumane, whatever you call it. And so that's the next step of what we have to do. I saw a reader post um, a question about what we should do about the Fifth Circuit opinion, which is just awful. I think what's going to happen is that either the Fifth Circuit sitting en banc or the entire Fifth Circuit, rather than just a three-judge panel, will consider or reconsider that question and overrule that ruling, or the Supreme Court will. I mean, that's how awful the decision is. There's a famous saying in physics about a paper. Niels Bohr allegedly said it, that the paper was so bad it wasn't even wrong. And I think that's what you can say about this opinion. It is so bad it's not even wrong because it just ignores not only the law, but like 600 other decisions by federal judges at all levels disagreeing with the interpretation adopted by the Fifth Circuit. Someone asked me, okay, I've got about 7 minutes left. I'll pick up the pace. Someone asked me what I thought about Gallup suspending its continuing tracking of the presidential favorability, whether Gallup effectively capitulated to Trump. Absolutely, there is no other rational interpretation of what happened. Gallup's presidential tracking poll was an asset of immense value. It was a historical data set that had value simply because it exists and would continue to exist. And so Gallup is now just going to walk away from that. That's preposterous. That's just simply another way of capitulating to Trump. Shame on Gallup for that. Shame on Gallup for lying to us to say that it's a business decision and they're just going to focus on issues rather than on presidential politics. We're not as stupid, apparently, as Gallup thinks we are. Um, a lot of questions expressing frustration over the lack of accountability for Pam Bondi, for Stephen Miller, for Russ Vogt, for the members of the Todd Blanche, attorneys in the DOJ, all of who appear to be in one form or another flouting the Constitution, and questions about what can we do about it. Oh, also in that group was a question about how can we hold accountable the ICE and Border Patrol agents who are also violating the civil rights and criminal law of the states in which they exist. And the answer that I want to give is not a very satisfying one, but it is both the right one, and I think it's one that is going to have to um, we'll have to hold in our hearts and minds for the moment. And that is, over time, the wheels of justice will turn. And it will take a while, but everything that we recognize as being unlawful and illegal will be held to account in the normal course. And it may take years. It may take years for the membership on the Florida State Supreme Court to turn so that Pam Bondi will have her law license pulled, and Todd Blanche, wherever he's licensed, and the lawyers in the Pentagon who are signing briefs going after Mark Kelly. They will all be subject to bar discipline. Um, the ICE agents who are violating the civil rights and violating criminal laws in the states, that is a tougher question because of federal the supremacy clause, and also some defenses that apply to federal employees that are not available to you and me as citizens. But those are all qualified immunities and defenses. And state prosecutors can and should, and I believe will, over time, identify those bad actors and file either criminal charges, or the people who've been injured will file civil charges. And we are seeing that. The woman who was shot by the border patrol agent with 5 shots, and then he bragged that there were 7 bullet holes in her, has filed a lawsuit, against a civil lawsuit, against that officer. And the discovery that is coming out against those officers is just shocking to the conscience. So I believe that they will be held to account, but it will take time. But I think it's important that we begin to alert those people who are violating the law to preserve their documents. As Jason Crow said to the lawyers at the DOJ who attempted to indict him, he said to Janine Pirot and others, formally, I am making a demand for you to preserve your documents about this decision to attempt to indict me, because I am going to sue you and I am going to ask for those documents. So they may think, Janine Pirot and the people who assisted her may think it's a big laugh now, but they no longer do, because they now recognize that Jason Crow is going to ask that the wheels of justice turn around on the people who are weaponizing the Department of Justice. So I think that should give us some sense that we have turned the corner, that we're being aggressive, that we're taking control of the narrative, that they are in retreat. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. We need to do more. We need to be better. And I'm not criticizing anyone who is giving their all at this moment in time. I'm talking to the friends and neighbors who watch you go out and stand in the freezing cold and say, gosh, that's really great that Mary and John and others are out there. We need to get them out there with us as well, because that's what it's going to take for us to win. But we are inching ever closer to that point. And I have to say, a year in to doing these live streams, I think this is the most confident I have felt over the entire course of this year. Um, we are winning. It is difficult to see that in the noise of the news cycle. But every time you take an action to defend the Constitution, you are helping us achieve that victory. So keep it up. God bless you all. You are all patriots, heroes of democracy. You have my undying gratitude for myself, my children, and my grandchildren. So have a good weekend. We will be in transit, so the newsletters may be a bit shorter or maybe non-existent. But thank you for everything you do. Take care. I'll be in touch. Bye.